Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. So, for those of you who may not know who DRBA is and what we do, having all kinds of technical difficulties. Our mission is to protect and preserve the natural and cultural resources of the Dan River Basin. And the Dan River Basin is about 3,300 square miles, roughly the size of Delaware. And it is everywhere the Dan River flows, the watershed. And we also protect the 5 tributaries of the Dan, which include the Mayo, the Smith, the Hyco, the Bannister, and the Sandy. So this is a map of our service area. And we do that through 3 priorities. And the reason we do it is through these specific priorities is that we start with recreation. We know that when people get outdoors that they can feel the mind, body, spirit of being outside. And they want to learn more about what they're seeing and hearing while they're out there. So we have an education pillar. And then finally, once people learn about all the importance and value that exists in the outdoors, they want to protect it for future generation, which leads us to our stewardship programs. And you can find out more about our programs that fall within these priorities on our website, danriver.org, and get involved in any one of those 3. So in February of 2014, an estimated 39,000 tons of coal ash stored in the lagoon beside the Dan River steam station poured into the Dan River. Approximately 4 to 5 years before that, we did a master plan on potential challenges to the Dan River, and we had warned and put in that plan that this was a potential challenge, and that most likely it wasn't if something was going to occur, it was when, and it needed to be handled. Unfortunately, our voice was not heard back 5 years before this happened. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and he will be able to talk about what we learned.
Hi, thanks everybody for joining. And I'm sorry my video is not working. Sometimes we're not real good with the Zoom still, even though we've been using it for years. But just to let you know, in case you do not know the location of the spill, this was the 3rd largest coal ash spill in the country. And it was about 2.5 miles down from our main office in Eden, North Carolina, situated on the Dan River. If you ever crossed Highway 14, crossing the Dan and looked downstream, you could actually see the steam plant. And from what I've been told, the people that live there, they could see the coal ash pouring out of those pipes in the smokestacks many years ago, which is why we had coal ash lagoons. So the primary coal ash pond was about 27 acres, 27 million gallons of water. The ash was 30 feet thick in some places. We don't even know how much ash was actually in there, but that's where the plant was located. And if you'll go on there, Tiffany. And that's what the lagoon looked like after the metal storm pipe collapsed. What happened was there was a metal storm drain that was located underneath this ash pond. Now, this plant's old. It was built in the 50s. So they had a storm drain running that drained the entire site. And, as everything else everywhere, storm drains run right into the river. Well, when they built this pond, they didn't realize, they didn't even think about it, I guess, that there was this big 48-inch metal galvanized pipe underneath this pond. The coal ash is acidic, and it eventually ate a hole in the pipe, and that's when we had the collapse on Sunday in February, and that drained 27 million gallons of water, and they think about 39,000 tons of coal ash shot out into the river. Okay, Tiff. So at the time of the spill, and this is an aerial view looking at the river, and you can see we had typical wintertime weather like we have right now with flooding on the dam. So the dam was muddy, but you can still see that giant gray stain in the river. And Dennis Limley, who was one of the guys that was an expert on coal ash, he did a lot of work on the Blues Lake spill or the leakage into Blues Lake from that power plant over there, and how the environmental damage that it caused. So he estimated the economic cost of the spill to be around 700 billion. And we really don't know. I mean, it's been years now. There's been all kinds of issues between marketing our area. You can still go on Google and type in Dan River, and you're going to get something about the coal ash. So tourism and marketing alone is huge in North Carolina and Virginia. You know how when you hurt that, it really hurts the economy. Not to mention all the people that live there in the neighborhoods and the drinking water all downstream of this. So let's go to the next one. And this is an aerial view of the lagoon. Very depressing sight. This looks like this big gray black cloud of mess, and it was quite disturbing for us. And Tiffany didn't mention this, but the way we found out about it was Tiffany was in the office, and a gentleman that was a postman ate alongside the river every day, and he came into the office and he said, "Hey, there's something going on with the Dan River. It's black. That's not normal." And so Tiffany got on and started calling around. We thought it was a sewage spill at first. And then someone mentioned that it was coal ash. Might have been coal ash from the plant down there. Sure enough, that's what it was. By that time, it already made it to Danville. And in just 2 or 3 days, it made it all the way down to Lake Kerr. Now, not all of this, but the actual, some of the stuff made it down there that quick. So it was an immediate problem. All right. Next slide, please. So how did we respond? Well, we do what we do best. We boots on the ground, or in this case, boots in the river. We found out about it. It happened on Sunday evening. Found out about it Monday morning. We convened down at the office and kind of had a little war room and decided what we were going to do. We had some other folks coming in. We had Appalachian Voices coming in, water keepers coming in, basically every river organization around, but we were the primary river organization, still are right there. So we got together a group of folks and we basically hit the river and went downstream. We didn't even know what we were going to see. We knew the dam was there. This was a run that is not real popular, but you can put in at the Eden Wildlife Access and go 5 miles downstream to Draper Landing. You have to portage around the Duke Dam. We knew that. We just grabbed sample bottles. We grabbed cameras. We went down to see what we could find. When we were approaching the dam, we saw the helicopters up above, and we knew that we were close, because no one really told us exactly where this spill was. I mean, it wasn't like it was hush hush. It was news. There was choppers. Duke was aware of it, but they were still trying to figure out how are we going to deal with this. I mean, this like I said, it's the third largest coal ash spill in the country. It's just like what happened to start with, and how are we going to stop it? Next slide, Tiff. So when we got on the river, got down below the dam, and we saw this site, and it was extremely disturbing. We have spent years teaching about the river, about water quality, getting people to love the river, turn their face toward the river, promote recreation, canoeing, paddling, water quality testing, getting kids in the river. And when we pulled up on this in the canoes, it just broke our heart. I mean, this is heartbreak on the dam, is what we call it, river of coal. And it was tragic, to say the least. And after the initial shock, we just started thinking, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this situation? It's something that we've never faced before. I got on the phone and started online and started researching coal ash. We knew about coal ash. We knew the dangers of coal ash, but we didn't know how to handle a spill. And then I started finding experts in the field that worked on the Kingsport, Tennessee spill, which was the largest in the country. and started emailing everybody I could to find out exactly what we were going to be facing and what we were going to do. Go to the next slide there, Tiff. And as you know, as you paddle downstream, this was the scene for many months. Every time you paddled downstream, you found coal ash. It wasn't that hard to find coal ash anywhere you wanted to find it. And you know, people say, well, what's the problem with it? You know, it's organic, it's natural, and if you don't know, coal ash is derived from burning coal. You know, we have these power plants or coal fire plants. Most everybody knows that. And what would happen was when they would burn this coal back in the 40s and 50s, and they did this in the steel mills as well, the ash would just shoot up in the smokestack. They built these giant smokestacks and blow it up into the atmosphere, and it would coat Eden, North Carolina, with black ash from what I'm told from the people that live there. So we also found out that breathing this ash was not a good thing. It created all kinds of cancer issues and lung problems. So we had the bright idea of we're going to keep it out of the atmosphere, which was a very good idea. And how did we do that? Well, we put up some filters on these smokestacks and collected all this ash. That was a great idea. It kept it out of the atmosphere. Part of EPA regulations. Let's get this stuff out of the atmosphere. Now, what do we do with it? Well, we can pile it up and store it. So that's what they did. Well, when they did that, they found out that the wind blows and it would blow this ash back up into the air and deposit it everywhere. So that did not solve the problem. So how do we solve the problem? Well, I got a great idea. They said, let's put it in underwater. And it was a good idea because the water would cap the ash and keep it from blowing away. The problem with all this is you have these ash ponds that are right next to the river because that's where the plants are located. They use the river power to bring the water in and power the plants. So they didn't want to move it too far, so they put it right next to the river. And then they built these lagoons. And we had major concern about these lagoons because of the big dikes and berms along the river. And we knew that coal ash leaked into the river and into the groundwater. It had been proven many times in many different places. But how do you fix that? Well, there was a lot of stonewalling about that, how to fix it. And oftentimes things don't get fixed until there's a disaster. Next slide, Tiff. So we were on the river. We started collecting coal ash samples, and what we were discovering was that there was places where it was 5 to 10 feet thick on the bottom. I'm sorry my video doesn't work. I've got a big sample of coal ash here I was going to show you. The problem with this is it's concentrated chemicals, heavy metals, unburned carbon, arsenic, boron, cadmium, chromium, copper, lead, mercury, nickel, selenium, zinc, all kinds of compounds. And even though these things are found in coal, when you burn it, it compresses everything down. Basically, you've distilled out all this carbon and you've got this all these heavy metals that are in there. Well, they're naturally in the environment, they're naturally in background sediments, but not in this concentration. And that's the problem. That's the thing people don't understand. A lot of times you don't see a problem that's under the surface. And with the Dan River coal ash spill for a couple of weeks, you saw it. It was very vivid. If you go to the next slide, Tiff. Even as far downstream as a Brew Grogan Park in Danville, the ash film was on top of the water. It was horrible looking. So people saw that, and of course they realized there was an issue. You know, Danville was alerted. They shut their water intakes off immediately. But this ash and the foam and everything persisted for weeks. So people were looking at this and realizing it was not a good thing. But it was not the acute part of this. Normally people see, dead fish, things like that, dead turtles, and then they realize there's a big disaster. This was much more insidious than that. So it did harm some wildlife. We know that for a fact, but we didn't see these major fish kills. We're very thankful for that. But it is a river system and things move around in a river. The problem with this coal ash is it is so thick and it binds together so well. it commingles with the native sediments that are in the river. And it created this thick barrier on the bottom, and it just coated the bottom of the dam. Everywhere we looked, from the plant downstream to Danville, there was a coating of coal ash on the bottom. And we have a lot of critters that live on the bottom, the macroinvertebrates that are the part of the food web, and these guys feed off debris and leaves and scrape things off rocks. And it's a very important part of the ecosystem. It's the bottom. Uh, and then you have these things that are immediately covered up. We had James River spiny mussels in there, green floaters. There was a lot of invasive exotics. The corbicula is a clam that lived in there. We saw a lot of that dead. But the problem was you didn't see these major fish kills. So after a while, people were like, well, it must not be too bad. Well, it's the things that they couldn't see that was bad. And the ash was coating the bottom. It was still a big problem. Uh, we we took a lot of sediment samples. We also did some macroinvertebrate monitoring where we would take the same nets and see what we could get. And it was not just us. So, other people did monitoring too. Obviously, Diener, North Carolina, Duke did their monitoring, EPA come in. The frustrating part was when we saw this, we're like, how come you're not in the water right now getting this coal ash out? Couldn't figure that out. We trying to hold their feet to their fire. And what was happening was they were stymied by the federal process of getting permits to remove things out of the river. At least that's what they were telling us. But it's very frustrating for us to watch weeks go by and then months go by before they ever stuck a dredge in the river to get this out. By that time, we had coal ash spread all the way down to Lake Carr. That's an issue. So that was very frustrating for us, but we continued to take water samples, sediment samples for a couple of years. We took sediment samples in for heavy metal testing, rough because it's very expensive, and Merck down in Reidsville was taking our samples along with everybody else's samples down there too. But it was the immediate reaction, within the first couple of weeks was obvious. You could see it, but the thing we're dealing with now is we knew this was going to be a chronic problem, and it still is as far as everybody is concerned. They didn't remove enough of this coal ash out. It's still in the river. It's mixing with the native sediments, and we just don't know the long-term effects of it. You want to go to the next slide there, Tiffany? I believe this was yours, right?
It is. So right after it happened, within the first week, the DRBA board got together and passed a resolution demanding the removal of the coal ash, both from the river and away and out of those lagoons that were still, all that coal ash was still left in there. You saw those pictures. And then we passed the resolution, and then we reached out to just about every municipality along the river, that 70-mile corridor that was impacted, and a good portion of those municipalities and those board of supervisors on the Virginia side and commissioners on the North Carolina side also passed resolutions. As Brian said, we began doing bioassessments and monitoring almost immediately. In fact, Brian had said, I heard from that mailman. I made a call to Eden. That was at 2:00 on a Monday afternoon. And by 4:00, we were out on that river that afternoon. DRBA became the first call for everyone in the region and the world, asking questions about how bad is it? Where is it? What's happening with it? And we responded to every single call, email, and request that we got. And I can tell you, we are a very small staff. And at the time, there were 5 of us. And Brian Williams and myself both had to step away from our daily jobs. And the other 3 staff people took up the slack for us while we 100% of our time focused on this issue. And I can speak for myself, and I know I can speak for Brian, because we were on the phone and passing emails back and forth at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, 7 days a week, for almost 8 months solid. We did not stop working. We are getting calls from around the world from reporters. We were meeting. I was doing a lot of the administrative and the meetings with partners, and Brian was boots on the ground, and he was doing a lot of the field work and monitoring and working with farmers. We couldn't do it alone. We worked in collaboration with a lot of different partners to help us. As Brian said, he spoke to experts around the world and those who had been through this before, while I was speaking to the Southern Environmental Law Center to see what we could do to make them move faster to get that coal ash out, which they could have if they had removed it within the first few days while it sat there at the bottom of that pipe. I believe that more than 50% of that coal ash could have been brought out of the river before it flowed downstream, even on that Monday. And then we needed to seek funding to sustain a plan to continue the water monitoring, the heavy metals testing, getting people out there, creating reports, talking to people. That all costs money that we did not have in our budget. So Brian, you want to talk about this? You want me to?
Yeah,
Oh, I
that's
can.
fine. I
Yeah,
will.
actually,
So,
go ahead.
yeah, did you have something else you wanted to add there too?
No, I do want to say that last point on the litigation. Our only litigation against Duke Energy was for the coal ash removal and permanent and appropriate disposal away from our waterways. Darby did not receive any cash settlements during this entire process.
I will have to commend the board and the staff. Immediately, that was one of the main discussions. Like, look, they're going to throw money at us. We need to decide what we're going to do with this. And a lot of organizations use these kind of disasters, and you can't blame them. They're trying to get money to keep operating, but we chose not to. That was a very tough decision. It wasn't a tough decision to make, but it was tough because it cost us. It cost us a lot of time and energy and money. But we did work with Duke. Duke had a history with North Carolina Fish and Wildlife of paying very low fines for things that they did, and many things were revamped after this with Duke and with the North Carolina Wildlife Commission and with the EPA. They found a lot of discrepancies and things were fixed, and oftentimes it takes a tragedy to do that. But what we did was we got on the river. We did bioassessments, like I said, with the macroinvertebrates. Other people were doing this as well. We were doing heavy metals testing. We were picking a suite of 4 heavy metals to do testing because there was no definitive test for coal ash. You couldn't just pull a sediment sample and go, oh, that's coal ash. What you had to look for was the heavy metals in there. So you had background in there as well. It wasn't that hard in the beginning to find, huge amounts of arsenic and selenium, concentrated amounts in these sediment samples, and it got less and less over time. And it's not because it went away; it's because it mixed with the sediment and went downstream. And that's just one of the tiny issues that we dealt with. As Tiffany said, a lot of public outreach. I took every single news organization on the river, from Al Jazeera to ABC to CBS to NBC. We did not want the spotlight. We did it when they asked us to. Water keepers and other people did a lot of that as well. Appalachian Voices, they took a lot of that and were on the news a lot, which was just fine with us. We didn't really want to do that, but we did answer every call that we were asked about. And as Tiffany said, we worked with a lot of different people on this, and still, we're still working on the marketing issue and the litigation issue as well. And DRBA has been really good. I think it's just the best organization. We were in a put in a position we didn't want to be, but we made the best of that situation. And one thing we're really good at doing is reaching out and finding the experts. We don't just walk out there and go, oh yeah, we know all about this. This is what we need to do to solve the problem. We're first to admit, hey, I don't know. Let's go figure it out. Let's see what we have to do. So next slide, Tim. So this is one of the things we decided to do. We're going to pick some sites to monitor. Obviously, the on the left-hand side of the screen there, you'll see that cluster of sites. We picked sites above stream so we could have some baseline data. We picked sites downstream, mostly in that stretch between the plant and the North Carolina line. That was where the predominant of the coal ash was in the first year. Now, given the Dana's dynamic river and floods, we had that immediately happen. A huge concern for us was the flooding, like you just saw a few days ago. The river gets out of its banks, goes up into the farm fields. There was tobacco growing down there, cotton, corn, everything else you can name downstream of that. So we had that concern. Hey, what's going to happen when all these heavy metals are deposited on these plants? A lot of people weren't even asking that question or didn't even seem to care about it. But we knew, being on the river all the time, we knew it was going to be a problem. Sure enough, it was. And it also carried these sediments downstream. So we had a lot of different sites there. We couldn't monitor the whole river all the way down to South Boston, although I did take samples all the way down to South Boston. We would pull sediment samples with a core sampler. We look at the macroinvertebrates, and a lot of people's like, well, and we got a lot of data out of this, but the main objective of this was to hold people accountable. We wanted people to know that we were out there looking at it, and they better be out there looking at it too. And they did. We had North Carolina Fish and Game, EPA, Duke. We had a lot of different state organizations out there monitoring. They seemed to have a little bit rosier outlook than we did on it, but at least they knew that there was an organization out there doing monitoring and could point to their data and say, this is what we got, and compare it with their data, and at least let them know that we were out there doing it. Next slide, Tim. So I mentioned, here's one of the things that we would do. The river's a little bit down here, and you can see them digging into the bank, and you see that gray pouring out of there. Well, that's a layer of coal ash. So the sediment, we've had the floods, it's come up and brought native sediments over the top of the coal ash. And just about anywhere for a couple of years, you could go down there and dig down. You only had to dig down about 5 or 6 inches in most places, and you would hit this solid black layer of coal ash. Now you go out there now and you can take a core sample, and you could probably find some places where you'll pull up, a blacker sample. But for the most part, this has been mixed in with these sediments. So it's very hard to define anymore. But for a while there, that's all we saw was every time you dug down, you could take anybody out there and find coal ash just about everywhere. Next slide, Tim. And of course, we took a million pictures. We photographed everything. I'm down in Danville right here. That's Corbicula up there. Now we have natural shell middens, which means that muskrats and raccoons and otters will eat these things and have these little places where they pile up the middens, like on this rock right here. But we also saw hundreds of thousands of these shells and along the river. It was just not normal. People would say, well, that's normal. They die off like that. Not like this. And it was just several weeks after the river receded and started going down. And, it's pretty obvious. The coal ash coated the bottom of the river. These things have to breathe oxygen out of the water. If they can't get to the oxygen in the water, they're going to die. Who knows how many macroinvertebrates are lost, but you're not going to see those little bodies floating up to the top. So it's very hard to pinpoint evidence. We did see a few turtles deaths. We saw catfish with sores and things like that. But we spent a lot of time taking a lot of photographs, and we wanted to get as much documentation as we could while we were out there. Next slide. We also had a lot of requests for research assistance, and we were glad to do it as much as we could. I had Cornell University, University of Maryland, Virginia Tech, Salem College, everybody that had done anything with coal ash. Appalachian State was there too. Anybody that had done anything with coal ash previously or had a research department was really interested in the spill. There was a lot of sites that was easy to get to. Nobody had dealt with anything like this that's mixing in the river before. Most of the spill over in Kingston, that was a big dam break, and they had a major cleanup there, wiped out a lot of species and a lot of things over there too. But this was a little bit different because it's going to be a lot more insidious. Some of the neat things that we found out, I had some researchers do electron microscopy of some photography of some of the coal ash. And you could see the really pointy, sharp particles, which it's like that in of itself is can be an environmental problem. But also, we had researchers looking at what happens to coal ash when it gets in an anaerobic environment. And particularly, we did a lot of research down at Schoolfield Dam because that was the first dam downstream. So we had this pile of coal ash, and they did remove some down there. But we got out there and took core samples, uh, and the guy here, Dennis from Cornell, he would take these core water analysis samples and figured out that this heavy metals, when it was in the anaerobic environment, sitting there for a long time, it would create methyl mercury, which is deadly. So there was a lot of issues that we just didn't know about, and we still don't know about. We do know that this coal ash rolled downstream, with every flood and spread all the way down to Lake Carr. Now, here's the thing: Lake Carr, or Bugs Island Lake, if you're in Virginia, this is where all this stuff is stopped. We don't think any of it has gone past Lake Carr. So it's like a big settling pond. The problem with is it has a lot of anaerobic environment there. So what's going to happen in the future when all of this gets down there and gets piled up and creates these toxic chemicals? We just have no idea. And that's such a big unknown with this coal ash. That's why we keep talking about this all the time, because they did studies, they did testing for a couple of years, and they did had a 5-year plan. There was supposed to be a 20-year plan about testing, but I don't think that ever came to fruition. So people down the line may be dealing with this. And I've always talked to people and tell them this is a chronic issue. And it's just like everything else. We don't know. We didn't know about lead-based paint on windowsills until people started having problems with it. Then we got rid of it. We didn't know the effects of asbestos until people started having problems. And then we kind of changed the way we do things. This is one of those things just like that. We have new contaminants or old contaminants in the river, but we've had new problems now. The PFAS issue that we're dealing with in our contaminated water, and all the rivers across the country are contaminated by something, and everybody lives downstream from some kind of issue. And it's one of the things that we need to remember. So just because we're not seeing gray ash and sediment all over the place doesn't mean this is gone. They only got about 7% out of the river, so it's there. What effects it's going to have in the future, we just don't know. A lot of people said, a lot of researchers or people out there testing the water said, well, it's going to cap the PCBs that's already in the river. I'm just like, okay, we got one heavy metal capping another heavy metal. I don't think that's really a good way to look at this. But just by virtue of the nature of the dynamic Dan River and the constant flooding, mixing of these sediments is what really troubles me. And we know it rolls downstream. We got 75 miles downstream of this stuff, so don't really know what's going to happen, and that's just a big unknown. Did you want to talk about this one, Tiff? You're muted.
Yeah. Sorry about that, folks. I did touch on this a little bit. We were fielding literally 500 to 600 calls, emails a day for the first year after the coal ash spill. And many people were confused as to where the spill happened, and they were coming on vacation, or even local residents and businesses were unaware of where they fell in the watershed and along the Dan River. And although that, as Brian said, that's 75 miles past the spill to Carr was affected, the part of the Dan and the other rivers who are not part of that line of the coal ash, they were still tainted because people were just unaware of, they heard the Dan River and they knew that the tributaries of the Dan, and I mean, even people in Martinsville who live on the Smith, who were not impacted by it, were still nervous. And we had to spend a lot of time educating people about where they were in the watershed that they live, how the river system works. And that ultimately was a good thing, that more and more people learned about the importance of the river.
So you got next slide.
Nope,
Now you're going the wrong way.
I am. My gosh, I'm having my issues today.
Yeah, we all are. So what's happening today? Um, so for 2 or 3, up to 5 years, we were doing continuing bioassessments and monitoring. Uh, One of the really good things that came out of this is we already had a basic citizen water quality monitoring program. Staff was trained on this. We had a few people out there actually monitoring with macroinvertebrates, but this really um, was the impetus for us to get a good CWQM or Citizens Water Quality Monitor. I'm not even sure how many we have today, Tiffany. We have
It's over 100.
over 100 monitors, and people really wanted to do something. Well, I said, well, you can't really just go out there and grab coal ash. We don't want you doing that because it's number one, it's toxic. We don't want you on your skin. And number two, it costs a lot of money to do the IR and all the dionics and everything that you need to do to determine what's in this coal ash. So that was not feasible. But what you can do is help us out by being a river watch monitor, which is one tier, where you're just like the postman that came in and said, hey, there's something wrong with the river. So we encourage people, if they see something wrong with the river, if it looks funny, if it smells funny, if you see a bunch of trees getting cut down on the river, if you see a bunch of trash in the river, come tell us about it. That's the basic level of river watch. You can always tell us about it. Your municipalities, tell someone about it. You saw something on the river, and we get those calls still all the time. There's this dump here. There's foam on top of the water. I was just out a month ago, collecting samples on the Smith because of this foam, and we're trying to track down the source of this contamination. We still don't even know where it's coming from. Probably somebody, washing out their building or something. So we have a good citizens water quality monitoring program. What they monitor for on the second tier level is E. coli. And although the coal ash had nothing to do with E. coli, we have that problem in the river. And that helps people get out there. And it's something that you can easily learn to do. It's basically collecting water samples and letting the culture grow in a petri dish and counting the coliform bacteria colonies. And Virginia and North Carolina both have standards for E. coli bacteria and how many colonies can be in the water before it's considered not usable for recreation or for drinking. So we have those standards in place. So when the samplers go out once a month and take these samples, they can record it on our website. You can see it live on there, and you can see all the different sites that we have. And there's little pop-up windows that tell you all the sampling that they did, which includes pH and air and water temperature and things like that.
Brian, I'm going to jump in. If anyone is interested in becoming a DRBA CWQM, Citizen Water Quality Monitor, we are having a free training on Thursday in the city of Eden. So look it up on our calendar. It is free. And we provide all supplies to our monitors that you will need for 1 year of monitoring. So please check it out. If you haven't registered for it and you are interested in doing hands-on work that is so critical to the health of our waterways, this is the perfect way to do it.
Yeah, and also I don't know if people are able to get into the chat box there, but I meant to mention this before. If you have any questions, we're going to have a little Q&A at the end of this. If you think of something and you want to write it down, you can write it in the chat. We'll take a look at that. And when we get down toward the end of the program, I forgot to mention that. You may be writing questions down, or you may have questions, and we'll do the best we can to answer them here at the end. So what's going on with the coal ash ponds? Well, they dug the coal ash out, and they built new ponds that were lined, and they buried it. So that's one of the things that's been done, and continue to have some um, assessments of the river. We're constantly looking at this. We have gone out and looked at uh, sediment samples, and what we're finding is we're finding what we normally would see, this sediment mixed in there. And I have a lot of different, have a garage full of coal ash samples from this project. And it's just hard. It's hard to pinpoint where is this, where is the coal ash and what effects it's having. So that's what's going on with, we're not out there every day like we were. It's 10 years down the road now. We still want people to be aware of it. We don't want this. We want people to be aware that the river is safe to recreate in. We recommend not drinking out of the Dan or the Smith or any of our tributaries without purifying the water. That's just common sense. Our rivers across the U.S., there's not many that you can just drink straight out of the river. There's all kinds of E. coli, Giardia issues just with wildlife alone. So that's not something you want to do. But as far as recreation, getting in the river, um, falling out of your canoe, even swimming, we don't worry so much about that. The things we recommend is do not do this during flood situations. This is normal because you get all kinds of runoff, you get E. coli, all kinds of bacteria running in the river, not to mention the dangers. But also with coal ash, this stirs things up. So we just tell people to avoid river when we have flooding conditions. And in places like this particular photographs down at Grogan Park, just above Schoolfield Dam, and there's a lot of sediments on the bottom in there. I've had to do some diving in there to recover some equipment. It's about 25 feet deep, and there'll be places where the sediments 5, 10 feet thick, and then there'll be hard bedrock there. So it's a real buried bottom. But you don't want to be just walking around barefooted in sediment anyway, anywhere in the river, because there's all kinds of debris and you get your feet cut with glass. So you just need to take those kind of precautions. But bottom line is we still promote the river. We're still on the river all the time. Paddling is great. The river is, and people always ask me, well, is it back to normal? Well, the river will never be back to normal unless you removed everything out of the river that we dumped in there. It would not be back to that state. We still have dams on the river. We still have stormwater drains going in the river. So there is no normal for the river. The normal is let's keep it as clean as we can. So the next slide, I believe, is yours, Tiffany.
Yes. So Duke Energy has completed excavation of the 25 plus million tons of coal ash at 4 priority sites. So our litigation against Duke Energy resulted in not just the Dan River, but 4 more sites in North Carolina. The coal ash was moved from the ponds and then put into a lined pit and covered on the Dan River steam station site in Eden. So at least for the Dan River. So people were arguing about, should it be moved? Moving that amount of coal ash requires trucks and exhaust, and typically it may go to underserved neighborhoods. And environmentally and for the best of the citizens, it was best to keep it under the responsibility and funding and cost of Duke Energy to keep it on their site. So that is where it remains from the Dan River Steam Station. And here, this isn't the most recent, it's probably grown up a bit, but this is what that same picture we showed you in the beginning looks like now.
So people, like I said, ask us about the long-term effects of this. Obviously, the acute effects were that we saw sediment, we saw coal ash everywhere. It was disgusting. It was traumatic. It was terrible.
Heartbreaking.
It really was, and I still get emotional
I
when I
did
think
too.
about
Watching these pictures, I'm like ready to start crying, which is probably why I'm not doing my job very well as slide mover.
it.
Sorry,
It
folks.
brings a lot of it back, and we really, we didn't know what was the long term of this was going to be. We had spent so much time working with the community and with kids and promoting the river, and then here we've got this disaster. Um, and we talked with a lot of people. We did a lot of testing. The thing is, you don't know. The unknowns were the problem. We spent a lot of time talking to reporters. I'm going to be talking to one today with the anniversary coming up. We've done a lot of interviews. I spent some time in Washington, D.C., testifying before the Offices of Budget and Management about what we thought were the effects, the long term marketing and effects to people's land, what the recovery may look like. So we've been all over the place with this, but bottom line is there's still coal ash in the river. It's never going to disappear. There's no way you'll get all that out of there. I'm really concerned about it moving downstream into Bugs Island Lake and mixing with those sediments, and what we're going to see long term. I think uh, people did as good a job as could be expected at the time with a lot of unknowns. We were very frustrated with the EPA. It took them a while to get down here and figure out, oh, it's a bi-state thing. Maybe we need to be involved. It's a federal issue now. That took like 3 weeks before they even decided it was their problem as well. And getting the stuff out of the river, we were very, like I said, very frustrated with that. But all in all, Duke did work with us, and we don't want to vilify any one particular organization or person because unlike places in West Virginia where corporations have completely thrown toxic stuff in the river and polluted it and destroyed people's water supply and then shuttered their plants or wouldn't even let reporters on the site, we did not have that issue. They have been open with us. We've been on Duke's site many times. Duke has been in our offices many times. We know just about everybody over there, and we know that at the bottom of the end of the day, they're folks just like us. The big thing is we also know that we want to turn our computers on. We want our heat going. We want power. We need power. So we can't just say, oh, you got to get rid of this. We've got to think of alternate forms of doing this, but we also got to think of ways that we can prevent any disasters from this happening again. Plant or every coal-fired plant right now, your lights would not come on in the morning and you'd be freezing this wintertime. But we do need to look at alternate forms of energy, whether it's nuclear, wind, solar, whatever it is. We all need to be working together to figure that out. And, as we learn things like this and we have disasters like this, we learn and we hope we never see it again. There's still ash ponds out there, and there's still threats to the waterways, and even lined landfills can still leak into groundwater and wells. So it's a huge problem. It's not going away. We hope the next generation maybe can come up with some good ideas to get rid of some of this pollutants. Tiff, that's you, I think.
So I want, Brian and I have been doing a lot of talking, but it wasn't just the two of us. We had literally hundreds and hundreds of volunteers helping us during this time. Our board was amazing. Jenny Edwards was on staff with DRBA at the time, and she worked as hard as Brian and I. The three of us were working 12, 18-hour days, 7 days a week. She was the program manager for North Carolina, so she fielded a lot of calls, did a lot of presentations. DRBA has been the voice of the Dan River and its tributaries for more than 22 years. Well, it's 22 years this year. And, our members, our donors, our advocates, we can't do it without all of you caring and valuing the importance of clean water. And we do this for future generations. We do it for ourselves now, but truly it is so that our children's children's children can have the most important resource that life needs to exist, and that's clean water. So I believe that is the end of our presentation. We are so grateful that you spent your time with us this afternoon listening to our story. We do have another webinar tomorrow at 4:30. You are welcome to register for, and I will be speaking to Duke representative from Duke Energy, Jimmy Flife. So please spend more time learning about this very important and heartbreaking incident that happened right here in our watershed a decade ago.
And
I do not see anything in the chat box.
I know a lot of
Um,
people, know a lot of information. We've provided a lot of information to folks, and uh, it's funny though when you talk to other folks and mention a coal ash if they're not from around here, they don't know a lot about it, and you can't blame them. It wasn't immediate to them to their problem, but it is immediate to us. It's still in our forethought. So if you have questions later on, we're easy to find. Dan River Basin Association, danriver.org. It's not that hard to find us. Our emails are on there. Please contact us, give us a call, whatever. We can try to answer any questions. Once again, we don't know everything. Um, we are not chemical engineers. We are not, you know, biological. We have a little bit of everything. So what we do have is the ability to find out the answers and to go to the experts and ask those questions, and collectively together we can try to figure out ways to prevent these problems in the futures, and also the ways to solve the problems that we do have already that we're facing now. So, as Tiffany said, you can visit our website. You can find out more about it there. There's plenty of stuff online about this. It's pretty easy to search Dan River and coal ash, and it'll give you a lot of things that NSYNC Dieter did, DEQ, assessments on this. You can read about the fines that were given and what Duke is doing these days to protect our waterways. So, not all good, not all good, not all bad. Um, it's just one of these unfortunate things. We did the best to deal with it, and the way that we thought was best, and still dealing with it. So please, if you have any questions, let us know. And the main thing is to try to remember this. We don't want to celebrate this as an anniversary. We just want to remember that this did happen. Things like this do happen, and they can happen again. So we need to be diligent. We have things that are threats to our waterways, whether it's logging, stormwater issues, pollution of any kind, uh, any type of degradation to our water resources. We need to be aware of it. We need to take action. So one of the ways that we can do that is getting involved and knowing about these things. So if you've got a better understanding of what happened 10 years ago, then we can prevent things like that in the future. So we really appreciate it, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So Sonia said the chat box was disabled when she typed it in. Sorry about
yeah.
that. I guess it's
Should be able to chat.
yeah, we've done a lot of these, and we haven't had the problem that we've had with this one. So
No, it's been very odd. I have literally run hundreds of these webinars and I don't know. There we go. Oh, there it comes through. So ongoing reparations. Duke Energy did their final financial settlement in 2023, I believe. So there are no ongoing reparations. Duke Energy is required to continue monitoring with their requirements of having that property along the river. Of course, we will still continue to do what we're doing. That will not stop. But unfortunately, if something comes up or happens in the future, that will be a brand new start to finish it, to working through a process for to fix whatever problem may arise in the
I
future.
think one of the good things is,
Thank
they paid about, I think it's around $5 million Duke did. So a lot of this went into a water resources fund. I believe that was a question we had just now. Who got the money from Duke's
Well,
financial?
and that fund has been depleted.
Yeah. So the answer to that is a lot of different organizations did. DRBA did not receive that. We were some of the administrators on some of this when people would have an idea for either planting trees or doing a youth program, or we had a lot of people experimenting with coal ash to see, how can it be used for fertilizers? Can it be used in construction equipment? So there was a lot of those out there, and that's where a lot of this money went, was into some research. It went to North Carolina State and Virginia Fish and Wildlife. They're actually doing some mussel repatriation with mussels down in Danville right now. The endangered Roanoke log perch is in that stretch of the Dan River. A lot of work upstream. Duke has bought property. They've helped on projects removing dams, doing mitigation. So there's a lot of stuff that the public didn't actually even see where a lot of this money went to for resource repair. It's actually natural resource damage assessment. Uh, they did, which is NERDAR, we called it, and they said, okay, this is what we think it's going to take to repair the damage that you did. Obviously, you can't completely repair all the damage that we did, but they did spend a lot of money in it. One of the things that you always have to be concerned about is when you hold someone's feet to the fire, is it going to burn you too? And you pass along the cost to the consumer as well. So anybody that's been around any kind of boards or city council knows that there's always somebody complaining about power rates and power increases. And although they do make a lot of money, there's no doubt about that. It's one of the largest payouts in any state is power companies. They still there's still a cost to the consumer. So when we're running around demanding low cost energy, and then we have an issue that's going to cost somebody to do something, it's going to cost us as well too. But that's something that I personally am willing to take. I don't want to see 100% rise in my energy prices, but I don't mind paying extra to do the right thing. And this is the problem, and this is one of the reasons this happened. We had this coal ash. What are we going to do with it? We can't dump it somewhere. We can't just leave it here. We got to put it somewhere. What's it going to cost to get rid of it? Well, it's going to cost a lot of money. We're going to have to take it somewhere else and buy a piece of land and put it in a landfill. So that's why it was decided to be located on the Duke site. But over the years, this is what happens. It's like, okay, we've got all this excess waste. Now, do we spend millions and millions of dollars figuring out what to do with it, or do we put it over here in this pit and keep the costs down? So we have to do the right thing, even if it costs money. But at the same time, the people that are affected the most are the poorest in society. They're trying to keep the lights on. They're trying to make ends meet. So we've got to be aware of that as well. So it's tough to do this and make it work for everybody. But the main thing is protecting our natural resources, protecting our drinking water and our air. We know the things that are required for our health. So we're all doing the best we can, and we just need to remember that we need to work together to make these things happen. We do have to fight. We do have to have litigation. We do have to make sure that corrective actions are taken, but we also need to work to figure out the smart solutions for the problems that we all are responsible for creating.
Well, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A or the chat. It is just about 1:00. Certainly, if you think of something after this webinar, you're more than welcome to email us or give us a call, and we will do our best to answer your question. Hopefully, you'll be participating in a lot of things we have going on this week. Again, we'll be speaking with Duke Energy tomorrow at 4:30 through a Zoom webinar. On Thursday, we are holding a free 2-hour citizen water quality monitoring training for anyone interested in becoming a river protector. And of course, the first Saturday outing on Saturday will be held in Danville. You can find out more information about that on our website as well. So hopefully you will join us this week in remembering something that is heartbreaking, but as 10 years later, it's still looking at those pictures were making my eyes tear. But I did also, at the same time as I was looking at those pictures, remembering all the good things that did come from it. We have better legislation about the storage and disposal of coal ash now in the state of North Carolina and Virginia, and federally. Because of this, we people were forced to look at the river and see the importance it held to their everyday lives. When they turn on their faucet, many people get their water that comes out of that faucet from the local waterways in their area. So I will not forget the horror that happened 10 years ago, but I'm hoping that we can all work together to continue to make our waterways really the most pristine and beautiful in the world. Brian, any last words?
No, I just appreciate everybody being on and just want to remind everybody that we're very lucky to live in a region with a lot of resources like this, a lot of streams, rivers, and creeks. But the main thing to remember is that we all live downstream from somebody else.
Well, thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you either outside or online this week and for the rest of 2024. Thank you all.